Donald Trump went on television this week and told the entire world that China gets 90% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. He said it on Air Force One. He said it in the Financial Times. He said it on Truth Social. And then he threatened to delay his own summit with Xi Jinping if Beijing refused to send warships to help reopen the waterway. There is one problem. That number is wrong. And the distance between what the president said publicly and what the data actually shows is not a rounding error. It is the entire story of who actually holds power in this crisis, and it is not the person who thinks he does. Let me walk you through what is really happening here, because the framing coming out of Washington is that America is pressuring China from a position of strength, demanding that Beijing step up and share the burden of keeping global energy flowing. That framing collapses the second you look at the numbers. Analysts at Nomura put the actual share of China's total energy consumption that passes through the strait at 6.6%. Rush Doshi at the Council on Foreign Relations, who runs the China Strategy Initiative, said seaborne Hormuz imports now account for less than half of China's total oil shipments. The Oxford Institute for Energy Studies published a breakdown this month showing roughly half of China's crude imports transit the strait. That is real exposure, but it is not 90%. Trump overstated Beijing's dependence by somewhere between double and 14 times the actual figure, depending on which metric you use. Meanwhile, please leave your questions or comments in the comment section. I will answer each one individually as time permits. Also, I would be very happy if you liked the video and subscribe to my channel. Now, let's continue. And that matters enormously, because the entire pressure campaign was built on that claim. The logic was simple. China needs Hormuz more than anyone, so China should pay the cost of reopening it. But if the dependence number is inflated, so is the leverage. And Beijing knows exactly how inflated it is. Here is what makes China's position even stronger than the raw percentages suggest. As of early March, China held an estimated 1.2 billion barrels of onshore crude stockpiles, one of the largest strategic reserves on the planet. That covers 3 to 4 months of demand without a single tanker passing through the strait. And those reserves did not appear by accident. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimated in February that China was adding roughly 1 million barrels per day to its strategic stockpiles throughout 2025. Satellite tracking firms confirmed it. Beijing saw this war coming before the first bomb dropped and spent an entire year building a buffer against exactly this scenario. But the detail that truly reshapes this picture is one that almost nobody in Western media is covering. Iran has continued shipping oil to China throughout the entire conflict. Tanker tracking services confirmed that since February 28th, Iran shipped at least 11.7 million barrels of crude through the strait. Every barrel went to China. Iranian-flagged vessels and ships running dark with tracking systems switched off have been transiting the waterway while 150 commercial tankers sat anchored outside it, unable or unwilling to cross. The blockade strangling global energy markets does not apply to Beijing. China is receiving discounted Iranian crude through the same passage that is pushing Brent above $100 a barrel for everyone else. Now sit with that picture for a second. The United States is fighting a war that closed the world's most critical oil choke point. American gasoline prices are up 17%. The International Energy Agency announced the largest coordinated reserve release in its history for 100 million barrels, just to stabilize markets. And the country Trump is publicly demanding help from is simultaneously receiving cheap oil through the closure, cushioned by the largest strategic reserve in Asia, and structurally less dependent on oil than at any point in the last 20 years. Trump's demand was not a negotiating position. It was a public admission that America needs China more than China needs America in this specific crisis. And the entire world watched him make it. Beijing's response was a clinic in saying everything while committing to nothing. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian called the situation tense, said it was undermining global stability, urged all parties to cease military operations, and declared that everyone has a responsibility to ensure stable energy supply. He did not say China would send ships. He did not say China would do anything concrete. Foreign Minister Wang went further in tone, but not in substance, calling China the world's most important force for peace and warning about the flames of war spreading. He also pushed back against what he described as attempts to bypass the United Nations and assemble small blocs, a direct shot at the coalition framework Trump is trying to build. China is not just declining to participate. It is positioning itself as the alternative institutional anchor for the international response. When Trump floated delaying the Beijing summit, his own Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on CNBC within hours to walk it back, telling the network that any delay would be logistical, not because the president demanded China police the strait. That is a senior official publicly cleaning up a presidential threat in real time while the other party watched and said nothing. That is not the posture of a government feeling squeezed. And not a single country Trump named has committed to sending warships. Japan's prime minister said explicitly they have made no decision. South Korea has been noncommittal. France is not committed. The UK said it would not be drawn into the wider war. Trump acknowledged he asked roughly 7 countries and said some agreed but declined to name them. That is not coalition building from strength. That is projecting momentum that does not exist. Now here is where it gets structurally more dangerous for Washington, because the strait is only one of the pressure points Beijing is sitting on. Iran signaled this week it was considering allowing limited tanker traffic through Hormuz on one condition: transactions settled in Chinese yuan, not US dollars. China's CIPS payment system, the yuan-denominated international payment rail, has expanded significantly in recent years. Yuan-settled oil trades already occur with Russian and Iranian crude through sanctions-adjacent channels. If formalized, this would be the most direct challenge to the petrodollar system in its 52-year history. It would not unravel overnight, but the direction is unmistakable. If Japan needs oil through Hormuz and Iran says the toll is denominated in yuan, Japan needs yuan reserves. If South Korean refiners need Gulf crude and the clearing runs through Beijing, that is a permanent structural shift in dollar demand. Every central bank that starts holding yuan for energy is a central bank holding fewer dollars. Iran just placed that question on the table at the most visible choke point in global trade, and China is the only country positioned to process the answer. Then there are the rare earths. Reporting this week indicated the United States holds roughly 2 months of rare earth inventory for military use. Rare earth elements are embedded in every weapon system America is deploying against Iran right now: missile guidance, fighter jet components, radar, precision munitions. China controls approximately 70% of global rare earth production and close to 90% of refining capacity. Even if raw or exists elsewhere, the processing infrastructure to turn it into weapons-grade material is concentrated in China. Beijing has not cut exports. It has not threatened to. What it has done is hold high-level meetings on export policy, announce plans to strengthen controls under its next 5-year plan, and let the vulnerability become more visible to Washington with each passing week. That is message sending without escalation, and it is something Beijing does better than any government on earth. The third lever extends beyond the immediate crisis. Edward Fishman at the Council on Foreign Relations pointed out that China's decade-long bet on clean energy, becoming the world's largest producer of solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles, is paying off right now. He said China holds the key to all those technologies, and that gives Beijing enormous leverage as every energy-importing country scrambles to reduce dependence on maritime fossil fuel routes. The war Trump launched to project American military dominance is simultaneously accelerating the global transition toward energy technologies that China leads. The path away from oil shock vulnerability runs directly through Chinese supply chains. There is a contradiction at the core of all this that nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. Trump launched this war without consulting the allies most dependent on Gulf oil. Fishman made this point explicitly. The administration did not consult European or Asian partners before striking Iran. Those partners are far more dependent on Hormuz than America is. And now Washington is asking those same unconsulted allies to shoulder the risk of reopening a passage it closed. Japan said no. South Korea hedged. France is not committed. The UK will not be drawn in. The EU's foreign policy chief said all member states would need to agree. That is not a coalition forming. That is a coalition request being declined in multiple languages. Meanwhile, China operates the only consistent diplomatic channel to Tehran. It brokered the 2023 Iran-Saudi normalization. It signed a 25-year strategic agreement with Iran worth $400 billion. Roughly 80% of Iran's crude exports go to China. Beijing has more influence over Iranian decision-making than any outside government. And Tehran is signaling through back channels that some form of managed strait reopening might be possible, with yuan settlement as the price of entry. The summit in Beijing is not a venue where Washington arrives holding cards. It is a negotiation around a crisis America created inside an energy architecture China has spent 20 years positioning itself to dominate. The agenda was supposed to be tariffs. It will now be consumed by a war that closed the most important oil route on the planet, handed Beijing a platform for yuan-denominated energy trade at the world's most visible choke point, exposed American dependence on Chinese rare earth processing in the middle of an active air campaign, and isolated Washington from every ally it now needs. Trump said China will remember if it does not help. He is right that Beijing is paying attention, but what it sees is not a threat. It is the kind of strategic opportunity that comes along once in a generation. And that is a very different calculation than the one Washington thinks is happening.